In March 2024, a Russian patrol ship called the Sergei Kotov was moving through the Black Sea at night. It carried dozens of sailors. Ukrainian intelligence later valued it at about $65 million. By morning, it was on the bottom of the sea. The sea drones that sank it cost roughly $250,000 to $300,000 each. No crew, no cannon, no torpedoes. Small boats, barely 5 meters long, skimming the water in the dark. Even using the higher estimate, that is still a ratio of more than 200 to 1. And the Sergei Kotov wasn't the first. It wasn't the last. Over the course of the war, Ukraine said it had destroyed or disabled around a third of Russia's warships in the Black Sea and pushed much of the fleet away from waters Russia had dominated for generations. Here's the part that doesn't make sense. When the full-scale war began, Ukraine had almost no conventional navy left. Not enough destroyers, cruisers, or frigates to fight Russia ship for ship. Almost nothing that could contest the Black Sea in the old way. Russia had one of the largest navies on Earth and a powerful regional fleet in the Black Sea. So how do you cripple a navy when you don't have one of your own? The answer is the strangest part of this whole story, because Ukraine didn't lose the naval war by refusing to build a fleet. Refusing to build a fleet is exactly how it won. To understand that, we have to start with the trap Ukraine was in, and the decision that looked, at the time, like giving up. In February 2022, the math was simple and brutal. Russia's Black Sea fleet had dozens of surface warships, submarines, landing ships, patrol vessels, and support ships. It had a flagship cruiser and a home port at Sevastopol in occupied Crimea, a port Russia had held since 2014. The Russian Empire had first built Sevastopol as a naval base back in 1783. Ukraine had a coastline and almost nothing to defend it with. Most of its pre-war fleet had been captured or scuttled years earlier. The largest warship it had left, the frigate Hetman Sahaidachny, was scuttled by Ukraine in the first days of the invasion to keep Russia from capturing it. On paper, the Black Sea belonged to Russia. The fleet's job was to blockade Ukraine's ports, choke off its exports, and support landings along the coast near Odessa. And in those first weeks, it did exactly that. Ukrainian grain, the food that feeds a large part of the developing world, sat trapped in port. The economy began to bleed. This is the trap. A normal country facing this would try to build or buy warships to contest the sea. Ukraine could not. There was no time, no money, and no shipyard safe from Russian missiles. Trying to match Russia ship for ship was impossible. So Ukraine made a decision that, at the time, looked like surrender. It decided not to build a navy at all. Instead, it asked a different question. Not, how do we win control of the sea, but how do we make the sea impossible for Russia to use? Those sound similar. They are not. And the gap between them is the whole story. The first answer came on April 13th, 2022. Ukraine hit the Moskva with Neptune anti-ship missiles. The flagship sank the following day. The Moskva was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, a Slava-class cruiser, more than 600 feet long, the proud symbol of Russian naval power in the region. It was the same ship that had ordered the Ukrainian defenders of Snake Island to surrender, and received that now famous reply. The ship caught fire, the ammunition aboard began to detonate, and it went down. It was one of Russia's most humiliating naval losses since the war with Japan in 1905. Russia tried to downplay it. That was never going to work. But the symbolism, the wounded pride, that wasn't the part that mattered most. The part that mattered was technical and quiet. The Moskva was the fleet's main long-range air defense platform, the ship most capable of protecting a wider naval formation from air attack. It was the umbrella. When the umbrella sank, every other ship in the fleet was suddenly more exposed. Russia's plans for an amphibious landing near Odessa became far harder to imagine, and the fleet's posture changed. One ship, and the whole calculation shifted. That told Ukraine something important. You don't have to defeat a navy. You have to find the piece that holds it together and remove that. But missiles like the Neptune were expensive and limited. Ukraine had only so many. To do this at scale, against a fleet that size, it needed something cheaper, much cheaper. And that is where the real innovation came in. It came in the form of a boat with nobody on it. The Ukrainians built unmanned surface vehicles, sea drones, under two main programs. One called Magura, run by military intelligence. One called Sea Baby, run by the security service. The details differ, but the idea is the same. A small, low-profile composite boat, riding low in the water and hard to spot in the dark. A camera and a satellite link, so an operator hundreds of kilometers away can steer it. And in the front, a few hundred kilograms of explosives. The Magura 5.5 is around 5.5 meters long, can travel hundreds of kilometers, and can carry several hundred kilograms of payload. It costs a fraction of what any warship costs. And critically, when one is destroyed, nobody dies. No sailor, no crew, no funeral. You can lose 10 of them on a single mission and simply build 10 more. Now hold those two facts next to each other, because this is the center of the whole story. A Russian warship is a concentrated bet. Tens of millions of dollars, dozens of lives, years to build, all riding on a single hull. A sea drone is the opposite. Cheap, expendable, faster to produce than a warship, and it risks no crew. When those two things meet in the dark, the economics are not close. The defender has to be perfect every single time. The attacker only has to get lucky once, and getting lucky is cheap. That is the asymmetric cost doctrine, and it is the answer to the question the hook asked. Ukraine did not beat the fleet by building a better fleet. It beat the fleet by making every Russian ship a bad bet. Each warship became a multi-million-dollar target that a $250,000 drone boat could threaten. Repeat that enough times, and no amount of naval tradition can save you. And Ukraine did repeat it. The landing ship Caesar Kunikov was sunk by drones off Crimea. The patrol ship Sergei Kotov was attacked several separate times before the drones finally got it. Landing ships, patrol ships, missile corvettes, intelligence vessels, and support craft kept appearing on Ukraine's target list, struck by a mix of missiles, drones, sabotage, and mines. At that point, the Ukrainian military estimated it had sunk or disabled around a third of Russia's warships in the Black Sea. Britain's defense secretary described the fleet as functionally inactive. Now think about what that phrase means. The fleet still existed. The ships were still floating, but it could no longer do its job. And a navy that can't do its job is just expensive metal sitting in a harbor. Which brings us to where those ships went. Because the next part of the story isn't a battle at all. It's a retreat. Sevastopol, the home of the Black Sea Fleet for almost 2.5 centuries, was no longer safe. Ukrainian missiles had struck the fleet's own headquarters there. Ships in the harbor were being hit at the dock. So Russia began moving many of its most valuable ships away from Sevastopol and towards safer ports farther east. The main forces pulled back to Novorossiysk, a port on Russia's own coast, far from Crimea. A fleet that had grown up in Sevastopol, that had been based there for generations, was now running its operations from a harbor much deeper inside Russian territory, simply to stay out of reach. Sit with that for a second. A fleet that had projected power across the Black Sea was now operating from farther east, and even those safer ports were no longer completely out of reach. The retreat itself was the victory. Ukraine didn't need to occupy the Black Sea. It just needed Russia to be afraid to use it. And the moment Russia pulled back, something opened up. Remember the grain. Ukraine's exports had been strangled at the start of the war. Food meant for millions of people stuck in blockaded ports. When Russia walked away from the deal that was supposed to let that grain move, most people assumed the blockade would simply return. It didn't. With the fleet driven east and the sea no longer safe for Russian warships, Ukraine opened its own shipping corridor, hugging the coast, and the grain started moving again. No new grand treaty, no Russian permission. Ukraine opened the corridor because Russia's fleet could no longer enforce the blockade the way it had at the start of the war. Many analysts saw that reopening as one of Ukraine's most important strategic achievements of the war. A trade route won without a single warship to escort it. So that's the how. A trap, a flagship, a cheap boat, and a fleet that pulled back. But if you're watching this, you can already feel the bigger question underneath it. The one that has admirals in Washington, Beijing, and the Gulf paying very close attention. If this worked here, where else does it work? Because the thing Ukraine proved isn't really about Ukraine. It's about a shift in what the sea costs. For 100 years, sea power meant big ships, carriers, cruisers, destroyers, enormously expensive, enormously powerful, and concentrated in a small number of hulls. The whole logic rested on one assumption, that the thing strong enough to threaten one of those ships would itself be expensive and rare. Sea drones break that assumption. Suddenly the threat is cheap, and there can be a lot of it. A single aircraft carrier costs billions and carries thousands of lives. The question every navy is now forced to ask is the same one Russia learned the hard way. What happens when something that costs almost nothing can come at it in swarms, in the dark, risking no one? Look at where this logic points. The Persian Gulf, narrow and crowded, where small fast boats have always been a worry. The Red Sea, where similar drone boats have already been used. And above all, the Taiwan Strait, roughly 100 miles of water that any invasion fleet would have to cross. A defender who can't match China ship for ship might not need to. They might only need to make that crossing a bad bet, the same way Ukraine made the Black Sea a bad bet. I want to be careful here, because this is where confident takes get ahead of the evidence. The Black Sea is not the Pacific. It's smaller, more enclosed, closer to friendly shores, and the Russian fleet had real weaknesses of its own in training and air defense. A war over Taiwan would involve far larger distances, far stronger defenses, and a navy that has studied exactly these lessons. So the honest read is not that drones have made big ships useless. It's narrower and more unsettling. The era when expensive ships could safely own the water, unchallenged by anything cheap, is over. Every navy now has to plan as if the cheap thing in the dark is out there. That's the real reason this story matters beyond one war. Ukraine didn't just sink some ships. It ran a live demonstration of a new kind of naval math. And the whole world took notes, including the people who own the biggest fleets and the people who might one day have to face them. So when you ask how Ukraine crippled a navy without building one, the answer is almost philosophical. It stopped trying to win the sea and started making the sea too dangerous to use. It traded steel for software, hulls for swarms, and pride for arithmetic. And it turned out that arithmetic, a few 100,000 against tens of millions, was a war Russia could not afford to keep fighting. If you want more breakdowns like this, the strategy underneath the headlines, consider subscribing. It is the fastest way to make sense of where the next one of these is going to happen. Because somewhere, in a quiet shipyard, someone is already building the next cheap boat. And some very expensive fleet has not realized yet that it is the target.